So thrilled to have you here again. I mean, we met last year, but
Oh, good to see you again.
good to see you. Anibor Kragha, the Executive Secretary of African Refiners and Distributors Association. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
In light of the current global energy transition and increasing environmental concerns, how is ARDA modernizing the refining infrastructure to meet cleaner fuel standards and while ensuring economic viability for African countries?
Well, thank you very much for those questions. Again, great to be back here. I think to answer the question, we'd have to take a bit of a step back, as I typically like to do, and talk about what the landscape looks like from a cleaner fuels perspective and what. Refineries around the world, to attract any investments, you have to have some kind of ESG type of overlay in terms of your investments, right? And for ARDA, what we're looking at is how do we look at existing refining infrastructure and look at how can we decarbonize or reduce the carbon footprint of those refineries. I did mention, I think last year, the stuff we were trying to do with the SIR refinery in Cote d'Ivoire and how that's progressing. But it's looking at fuel consumption sources, what are the scope 1 and scope 2 emissions in existing refineries that can be looked at. So that's one. The second thing, though, is now starting to look and say, for new refineries that are coming on stream, what should those look like? What kind of economies of scale are required? We have a lot of smaller refineries in Africa. Is that the way forward? Or is it larger refineries with a larger footprint that can take advantage of economies of scale? Everybody's heard of the Dangote refinery coming on stream, what that's going to do, cleaner fuels, 10 ppm sulfur is the target, which hopefully they get to very soon, 650,000 barrels a day. Great. So what we're looking at is essentially ensuring that we start to look at harmonizing fuel specifications across the continent. I think I mentioned this last year, but I'll say it again. From a spec perspective, across the continent, we have 11 different grades of gas, oil, or diesel, ranging from 10 ppm sulfur to 10,000 ppm. 12 different grades of gasoline, ranging from 10 ppm to 2,500 ppm. So we're trying to work, and we've rekindled our relationship on this with the African Union Commission. We're hoping we can work with them on driving this going forward through their process. We have to first make the standards harmonized, and then we have to work on looking at the infrastructure that's required. Please remember that refineries is only one part of the entire value chain. You need robust storage and distribution infrastructure that will actually deliver this these refined products to various parts of the continent. I'm very excited I was on a panel yesterday with the chairman of CEF here in South Africa. And I heard that CEF just bought the Sapref refinery, which was 50% owned by BP and Shell, was shut down, was delivering about 35% of refining capacity in South Africa. Not only are they buying it, they want to upgrade it and take it to 600,000 barrels a day. Very ambitious, fantastic. We support that. So we have to look at this from an energy security standpoint, focus on refining assets, decarbonizing existing refining assets, putting in place incremental refining assets for energy self-sufficiency, and then putting in place the robust storage and distribution infrastructure to support that increased refining base.
And just recognizing, the downstream's vital role in socioeconomic development, what innovative financial strategies or partnerships is ARDA exploring to attract investment in Africa's refining and distribution capacity?
I wish you'd come to our last panel that we just had on the Energy Finance Summit, where we had some really innovative discussions about that. I think the first thing to understand is that from a financing perspective, the traditional actors are kind of out the door, the commercial banks and the like, and you're having to look at new pools of capital, venture capitalists, private equity firms, family offices, as well as some DFIs, or development finance institutions, who are really getting involved in putting together the right kind of funding. Some of our key DFIs, like the Afrexim Bank, Africa Finance Corporation, AFC, are really working together to help our members and stakeholders in the downstream sector do the adequate work to really prepare their projects to secure financing. I think one of the great points from the earlier panel was to talk about you have to look at this from two perspectives. From the borrower's perspective, or the project developer, we're working on how can we now access these new pools of capital and do it in a way that's intentional, ensuring that we have the right project preparation done. We're engaging the relevant stakeholders in the ecosystem, which is the regulators, to ensure that they provide the frameworks for investment in the enabling environment to ensure this happens. And then all the other things that involve ESG and also making sure that we start to work again. You can't talk financing without talking who's going to drive the business as well. I think we discussed all of this. It hasn't really changed. But what we've done different since I last saw you is I did mention we're going to hold it, but we actually held the first ever ARDA investment forum as part of ARDA Week. And what was happening is everywhere were going, I saw my members and they were saying, we can't find any money. And the financiers were saying, we can't find any projects. So we sat down and said, listen, let's have the first ARDA investment forum focused on sub-Saharan Africa. So we had an East and Southern Africa panel where we got members like Sonangol in Angola, like Enoch in Uganda, and the like Puma Energy in Zambia to sit down with, I believe it was Africa Finance Corporation and Standard Bank to say, look, let's talk about, you guys have the projects and you guys evaluate, would you fund this project? What are the key things needed for bankability? And we did that. We also did that for West and Central Africa, where we had various refineries, SIR, SAR, and the like, talking to African Bank and Mauritius Commercial Bank. So we're not just looking at innovative financial solutions, we're also looking at putting platforms in place for that. Last point is we're working with the Global LPG Partnership on putting in place a $1 billion fund for LPG. We believe that the time has come for investments at scale in the LPG sector. Earlier this year, the IEA had the first Clean Cooking Summit for Africa. And one of the key takeaways was that there's a belief that if $4 billion a year is spent between now and 2040, between now and 2030, we'll be able to eradicate the clean cooking problem. For Africa, LPG is one of the biggest proponents of that. And it's been demonstrated that LPG also reduces carbon emissions. So what we've done is with the Global LPG Partnership, we've announced the launch of a $1 billion LPG fund to look at large-scale LPG projects.
And as ARDA advocates for development of local refining capabilities, what strategies does the organization have in place to ensure self-sufficiency in refined products while remaining competitive in global markets?
That's a very interesting question, this local or global. I think a different approach is to look at saying, how can we focus on African energy security by ensuring we have a robust intra-African oil and gas market? What does that mean? So earlier today, there was the OPEC Africa roundtable that was held as part of this AEW. And in fact, it's kind of supports the OPEC Africa Energy Dialogue, which has OPEC, of course, but has the African Union Commission, Apple for the upstream and ARDA for the downstream. And that is how you really start to talk energy security and self-sufficiency. When you talk about the global versus local, because Africa's population is growing, because we have a significant importation we're going to have to do over the next couple of years, given the energy demand that we have, what we're looking at now is saying, how can we have a net reduction in imports? So what we're looking at is, where should the strategic refining investments be? But how can that be supported with storage and distribution infrastructure at scale that will meet, that will be able to support this? We're also focused on LPG. I had an LPG forum for the first time this year. Very proud of that, because we believe that LPG for clean cooking is one of the best near-term options for reduction of carbon footprint and all that. But what I bring up LPG is, this is a clear case of looking at self-sufficiency in the downstream. We have situations where you have other members of countries in Africa that produce LPG for export, but yet you have Africans importing LPG from outside Africa. How do we have a robust intra-African LPG market for African LPG? How can we put the enabling environment? How can we put in place the infrastructure to support this? And then the innovative financial solutions. To add to that point earlier, pension funds are a big deal in Africa. How do we, and they hold the biggest pool of capital, I forgot to mention that in the last question, that we can actually use to support this ecosystem.
And just, my final question is, we're here at African Energy Week.
Yes.
What outcomes are you aiming to achieve this week?
For me personally, or for AIDO? For me?
For both.
Okay, for me. For ARDA, it's to ensure that the downstream sector of Africa continues to have a seat at the table in terms of investments on the continent. To ensure, and I always like to say, nobody here came to this conference by putting a barrel of crude oil into their car or into their plane. They had to refine it, but you also need the infrastructure to support it. So we need to make sure that the downstream sector, with all due respect to the upstream, is part of the conversation. What I'm also hoping is that we start to look at things like LPG, because there's such a big push for that. Let's actually look at how we can build this LPG market and look at ways where we can have innovative solutions for democratizing this and making this not just about imports, but taking this all across the LPG value chain to the last mile. And I'm hoping that, with the interactions I'm having with key folks here, I'm sure we'll be able to accomplish this. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope you have an amazing week.
I am already. Thank you. Cheers.